Good evening. It's my privilege to bring the Bible passage to you tonight. It's from Matthew 25, verses 31 to 46, and I'll be reading from the NIV version. So that's Matthew 25, verses 31 to 46. The subheading is The Sheep and the Goats. When the Son of Man comes in his glory, and all the angels with him, he will sit on his glorious throne. All the nations will be gathered before him, and he will separate the people one from another, as a shepherd separates the sheep from the goats. He will put the sheep on his right hand and the goats on his left. Then the king will say to those on his right, "Come, you who are blessed by my Father, take your inheritance, the kingdom prepared for you since the creation of the world. For I was hungry, and you gave me something to eat. I was thirsty, and you gave me something to drink. I was a stranger, and you invited me in. I needed clothes, and you clothed me. I was sick, and you looked after me. I was in prison, and you came to visit me." Then the righteous will answer him, "Lord, when did we see you hungry and feed you, or thirsty and give you something to drink? When did we see you a stranger and invite you in, or needing clothes and clothe you? When did we see you sick or in prison or go to visit you?" The king will reply, "Truly I tell you, whatever you did for one of the least of these brothers and sisters of mine, you did it for me." Then he will say to those on his left, "Depart from me, you who are cursed, into the eternal fire prepared for the devil and his angels. For I was hungry, and you gave me nothing to eat. I was thirsty, and you gave me nothing to drink. I was a stranger, and you did not invite me in. I needed clothes, and you did not clothe me. I was sick and in prison, and you did not look after me." They also will answer, "Lord, when did we see you hungry or thirsty or a stranger or needing clothes or sick or in prison and did not help you?" He will reply, "Truly I tell you, whatever you did not do for one of these least of these, you did not do it for me." Then they will go away to eternal punishment, but the righteous to eternal life.
Hey everyone, thanks Rick for reading one of the most intense passages in the scriptures. It's the last bit of Jesus' public teaching in Matthew, everything else he does in private, and it's very similar to the end of the first bit of his public teaching in the warnings at the end of the Sermon on the Mount. But I want to take you back to 2019 NRL Grand Finals. Anyone remember that one? Who's a Raiders fan here? Okay, well, what happened in 2019, do you remember? The Raiders got robbed. Do you remember that? You know, they're right near the line. The ref calls 6 to go, and in the middle of the play, he said, no, it's the last tackle. The Raiders lose their mojo. Roosters get the ball other end. They actually win the grand final based on the sort of umpiring weirdness. They felt like they were robbed. And there was something in them that went, there's something wrong about it. They've got to do something about it, you know. The next one's an image of my awesome kids, Lockie and Sarah. This is a long time ago, obviously, but they used to do squad swimming. They were both very talented, but there was a season there where a little sibling rivalry got the best of both of them. And Sarah was feeling like, okay, it's my turn to get my brother back a bit here. And so she, at that time, actually was experiencing a contagious rash all over her body. And she thought, okay, I'm going to throw caution to the wind. I'm going to have a hot shower, and I'll use Lockie's towel today. She said, I've got to get him in the swimming thing. So anyway, unbeknownst to him, Lockie comes and has a shower, dries himself, and he catches the contagious rash. He gets it much worse than Sarah, has to go to the doctor a few times and even get it iced off. It was that bad. How bad is that? Well, there's a win, right, for the girls. So anyway, funny one. You wouldn't want Lockie and Sarah dealing out the judgment at the end. Look, here's the other thing. The other day, a few weeks ago, actually, on our Tuesday food distribution thing, I saw a really disturbing video of a kid, literally a young high school kid, getting their head banged, smashed in the concrete. It was the 10th video I'd seen of this kid on TikTok. It's real, have been targeted all the way through the first year of high school, and nothing had been done by the authorities. And even that week, the parent went to the police and nothing had happened yet. And so I said, oh, look, we're going to have a cuppa and then I'm going to take you down to the police station. And in that time, I went and got the ladies in the back room who know her, and we prayed about it, asked for wisdom, and asked God to actually restrict the evil that we're seeing. And before I even got out of the driveway, the liaison officer of Campbelltown Police rang her up and said, look, go home. We're going to come there later. Your principal's rung. We've seen the video. And if you can make a report, we're going to actually throw the law at this thing. And it's just so good to see that. But look, would you agree with me, whatever your version of right and wrong, if you see something wrong, there's something hardwired into us that goes, I've got to do something about that. Would you agree? Yeah, it's how we're made. Except here's the weird thing. As soon as we start talking about the judgment of God at a dinner party, sort of it's a conversation killer. And one thing in this passage you've got to reckon with, we are in desperate need, our world is in need of someone who can come and set things right. That's what this image is all about. I want you to notice a couple of key, quick things about the setting that Jesus gives us here at the end. You heard Rick read it. The first phrase, it tells us about a judge. It says, when the Son of Man comes in his glory and all the angels with him, he'll sit on his glorious throne. This was talked about 6 centuries before in Daniel chapter 7. A figure like this called a Son of Man is going to come. The books will be open. He's going to make things right. Correct things that are wrong. Enact judgment and justice. And so this is the picture of judgment, and Jesus is the one doing it. The second thing I want you to notice, it's a universal judgment. The next verse, all the nations will be gathered before him. So no one's excused, regardless of your status, your pedigree, what you've achieved, your ethnicity. Everyone has to stand before that judgment. And notice the next phrase, he says, and he will separate people from another. As a shepherd separates sheep from the goats, he will put the sheep on his right and the goats on his left. This is not a trial, a deliberation, a negotiation. It's a settled judgment. You can't go up to heaven and think, I'm just going to make a deal with God. That's none of that. He's going to make that decision because he sees all, knows all. He's the one who can do it. So that's the first thing you've got to notice about the nature of what you're seeing here, the setting. And we have to reckon with the sort of apocalyptic turn he takes. It's pretty strong. Because what happens here, look at the first bit. There's a bit of spa theology up front. You can sort of germinate and marinate in the first one. Verse 34, he says, then the king will say to those on his right, come, you who are blessed by my Father, take your inheritance, the kingdom prepared for you before the creation of the world. Oh, there you go. It's for you. Come and enjoy, right? So that's a bit of spa theology. It's like just take in the eucalyptus. Beautiful. But it takes a pretty apocalyptic turn in verse 40 to the other group. This group on his left, he says, the king will reply, next verse. Then he will say to those on his left, depart from me, you who are cursed, into the eternal fire prepared for the devil and his angels. That took an intense turn. That's like an ice bucket challenge, a cold plunge therapy. It's not a spa thing. So whatever you do with this, you need to take it with a bit of weight, okay? I'm going to try and speak about it with a bit of reverence here because this is a huge thing that's happening. He's setting up the final judgment day. Now I have a question for you. There's a picture of a thermometer coming up. How do you measure your spiritual health? How do you work out whether you're spiritually hot or cold, strong or weak, whether you're maturing or regressing? We all have measurements, but what's your one? What's your thermometer to work that one out? Is it how much you read the Bible or want to read it, or how long your prayers are if you pray? Is it if you lost it with your kids and your spouse? Is it your moral decisions? You know, I went too far on Friday night drinks. Is it your like ethical boundaries around your current dating relationship? Is it the people you're praying for who don't know Jesus yet? How do you measure? What's your thermometer read on your spiritual health? I want to ask us to listen to Jesus' thermometer. In this whole series, we're sort of saying we want Jesus to convert the church. Are you willing to allow his prophetic critique to do something? So listen to his measuring stick, basically, for maturity, for worship. I'll just read his judgment in verse 35 through. For I was hungry and you gave me something to drink. I was thirsty. I was hungry and you gave me something to eat. I was thirsty, you gave me something to drink. I was a stranger, you invited me in. I needed clothing, you clothed me. I was sick and you looked after me. I was in prison and you came to visit me. After he says his statements, the people get surprised. Then the righteous will answer him, Lord, when did we see you hungry and feed you, or thirsty and give you something to drink? When did we see you a stranger and invite you in, or needing clothes and clothe you? When did we see you sick in prison and go visit you? The king will reply, truly, I tell you, whatever you did for one of the least of these brothers and sisters of mine, you did for me. Then he will say to those on his left, depart from me, you who are cursed, into the eternal fire, prepared for the devil and his angels. For I was hungry, and you gave me nothing to drink. I was thirsty, and you gave me nothing to drink. Eat and drink, I'm mixing up the eating and drinking. I was a stranger, you did not invite me in. I needed clothing, you did not clothe me. I was sick and in prison, and you did not look after me. Then they also will answer, Lord, when did we see you hungry or thirsty or a stranger or needing clothes or sick or in prison and did not help you? He said, truly, I tell you, whatever you did not do for one of the least of these, you did not do for me. That's his judgment. That's his thermometer read. I wonder if we can take it in. The first thing I want us to do is take time to reflect on the nature, the why of that. Then we're going to look at our disconnect from it. Let's look at the why Jesus gives us that thermometer read, or some of the why. In the ancient Near East, Mesopotamia, Egypt, it was a common thing when a people group picked a deity to go to a lot of trouble to build a sanctuary, right? A sort of a sacred temple, a place of worship, and the idol gets pride of place. And the community knew it was their job to tend to that idol, or something's going to go wrong. Maybe nature's going to go backwards. It will go to some sort of chaos. We need to keep things in step. So we need to honour and respect that idol. That's what they understood their job to be. And they also had regular inauguration ceremonies that lasted 7 days for those temples. That was normal practice in the ancient Near East. Go to the first page of the Bible, and scholars generally agree that God is giving an inauguration ceremony for his temple. It's a 7-day thing, and on the climax of it, Adam and Eve show up, crowned with honour and glory, and they're given the image of God, the likeness of God. The word, Selim up here, coming up on the next slide, is the word for likeness of God, for image. It's also the word for idol. So Adam and Eve were God's idol at the centre of his temple in creation. It's interesting, isn't it? By declaring that human beings are the image, are the idol, are the Selim of God, he's saying the primary way you honour me and ensure your well-being in the land is you care for my image. And my image is people. This is a massive issue. This is part of the why behind Jesus' thermometer read on how he measures spiritual maturity and what real worship is. See, all through the Bible, he's saying, I'm not an impotent, dead God that can be represented by a bit of wood or a bit of bronze. I'm the living God. You can only represent me by human beings made in my image who walk and talk and think and dream and build and speak. So that's how God is represented. You cannot separate worship of God and care for his image. In fact, God links blessing of his people to how they care for each other. And if they fail to care for his image, he says over and over again through the prophets, if you mistreat the foreigner, mistreat the widow, mistreat the orphan, if you exploit the poor, I'm going to expel you from the land. Literally, it says, I'll vomit you from the land. This becomes the litmus test for God's people when it comes to the worship of God. Now he ramps it up a bit. Have a look at this, verse 40. This is the who of it. The king will reply, truly I tell you, whatever you did for one of the least of these brothers and sisters of mine. The why of Jesus' metric is not just human beings in the image of God, but human beings that bear his name. When he says brothers and sisters, he uses that to describe his blood relatives, but also he says, my brothers and sisters are those who obey my Father in heaven. This is how it works for Jesus. He actually uses the word little one to describe, don't restrict the little ones. Not just kids, weak people, mistreated, misaligned people, little ones. He describes them in possessive terms. They're mine. The people who are coming to me. The first woe in 2 chapters ago, he says, woe to you Pharisees, teachers of the law, you hypocrites. You shut the door in people's faces. You guys don't want to enter the kingdom of God, and you don't let anyone else enter either. And he describes those who are entering that we don't know yet as his, those who already are as his. And he also describes, there's also a thread of thinking here that this is talking about how we treat missionaries. Because it's exactly the same language when he sent out, in Luke 10, his people on mission. He sends his disciples at 70 out on mission. They go to heal, to pray for the sick, to teach about the kingdom of God. They don't take many supplies. And he says, as they've received you, they received me. And so the language is the same. He says, so how do you treat, which is often how missionaries, those guys were, people without food, people who are hungry, people without a home, without clothes, estranged, or even persecuted in prison. So some people think the challenge for the church is how we treat someone like Craig and Red off in another culture when they're in need. Do we care about them? It's actually a sign of our true heart before God if we don't. That's the type of challenge it could be. So you put all that together, however you prefer to slice the cake. Essentially, God's saying Jesus says you cannot separate worship of God and care for his image. When the Apostle Paul in his early life was attacking the church, Jesus says, you're attacking me. My body is who I am. So remember, while every human being is bestowed with the honour of the image of God, those who follow Christ bear the name of God. And that's why this is personal for Jesus. And it's also why idolatry is connected to injustice through the Bible. Look at the first act, the golden calf. You know that one? Moses goes up the mountain. Aaron thinks, where the heck's he gone? Let's build something. They build a golden calf. And I want you to notice, when they named it Yahweh. They didn't name it some other deity. This is interesting. They named it Yahweh, the one who brought us up out of Egypt. It's offensive to God because God's not a dead bit of gold. He's the living God. He already made his image. They're trying to worship the same God with the wrong image. And so one of the outcomes of idolatry is you end up loving things and not loving people. You end up taking something meaningless and making it meaningful, and taking meaningful things and making them meaningless. You know, when you're a kid, 3 years old in the sandbox, all you care about is things. Your toy, no one having your toy. When you go through high school, usually you start caring about experiences more than things. I know plenty of 4-year-olds who care more about things than anything else. And I also know some 40-year-olds who care more about experiences than anything else. But the road to maturity is to go past those two and care about people more than experiences and things. And that's what Jesus is getting us to do. You cannot disconnect worship of God for how you care for his image. A few weeks ago, James talked about the passage where the religious leaders challenged Jesus, what's the most important law? And he says, love God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. And then he surprised them by saying, and the second one's like it, love your neighbour as yourself. These two are they cannot be separated in Jesus' mind. You cannot separate a loving God and caring for his image. End of the book of the Bible, in James, it says, you worship your Father in heaven with your mouth, and the same mouth you curse people made in God's image. It can't be. It's such a massive issue. So there's the why of Jesus' thermometer. Now I want to consider our disconnect, because what I want to say to us tonight is our generation, our church, we absolutely have disconnected Jesus' metric. At least in some ways I'm going to articulate. Here's the first one. Our view, we got this language of the heart. We invite Jesus into our heart. Who's the Lord of your heart? Is your heart on fire for Jesus? And we mean you're full of passion. You're full of emotion. You're full of determination for God. That's all good stuff. Nothing wrong with that. When a while ago Craig read in the service, he says this verse, they honour me with their lips, but their hearts are far from me. We usually translate that to mean a form of hypocrisy where someone says the right things but doesn't feel the right things. As though it's like a disingenuous, it's not authentic feeling. So what's the solution? Let's be real. Let's be honest. Let's be like the psalmist. Let's be like Job. Let's not hide our feelings. Let's be authentic. Now that's actually good. The Bible is going to teach that again and again and again. But I think what we've done is we've wrapped it all up and said, that's worship. Period. See, like when I get up and lead in prayer in the services, you probably notice, I prefer to use my words. One of the reasons I want to model, just go to God with your words. The most common prayer I pray is, help me. Multiple times a day I'm saying, help me, God. I want to encourage you, God is not saying you need to be flowery and clever and theological and, big biblical words. Just use your words and go to God. But over time, learning the art of prayer, you can learn so much from the words of others. So last time I got up and prayed, I started with 3 prayers that were written by people dead hundreds of years ago. And then I prayed my prayers. But you see, I'm just asking the question, theoretically, what if every week I just read prayers? We just read prayers from the front. We recited the Apostles' Creed. Our Father who art in heaven, hallowed be your name, your kingdom come. What if we did that one? There's nothing wrong with that, but what if we did that every single week? Would you start to, is this real, this place? Is this really authentic? Is anything actually from the heart here? You'd probably think that, wouldn't you? And I'd have to ask you the question, well, how do you deal with the fact that every single thing we've said from the screen so far wasn't written by anyone in the room today? Why does that feel okay? The 5 songs you're going to sing tonight, why is that okay? Oh, you got music and it makes it feel real, feel honest, okay, right, no. But there it is, that's our bias. Our bias is, if it's emotionally real to me, it's fair income, it's worship. A guy called J.I. Packer wrote a very famous book, Knowing God. He also specialised his study in the Puritans. And they broke down the human being very accurately. They talked to people of affection, people of the mind, and people of the will. And every time he wrote the word heart in some of his writings, puts in brackets, the will. Because he wants us to see the difference. See, you and I in our generation, if you talk to someone, you get down to their emotion, you feel like, I've got to the bottom of them, I've got to who they really are. And you definitely got to who they are with their emotion. But it's not the bottom of their heart. You're not at the bottom yet. When you get to my emotion, you get to an important part of me, but underneath that is my deepest commitments, the things I hold onto and trust the most, the things I love the most is the stuff that usually informs all the emotions. So let me just say, we live in a generation where we've translated the emotions as the biggest, most notable thing in the heart, but it's actually, J.I. Packer would say, those deeper commitments underneath, they're bigger. Listen to this quote from a guy called Mark Laverton. He wrote a book called The Dangerous Act of Worship. If you can put the next slide on, Josh, mate. According to the narrative of Scripture, the very heart of how we show and distinguish true worship from false worship is apparent in how we respond to the poor, the oppressed, and neglected, the forgotten. As of now, I do not see this theme troubling the waters of worship in the American church. But justice and mercy are not add-ons to worship, nor are they consequences of worship. Justice and mercy are intrinsic to God and therefore to the worship of God. That's a big call. Romans 12. it says, in view of God's mercy, present your body holy to God. This is your spiritual act of worship. No mention of emotion there. It's actually included in the whole thing. My brain, my heart, my feelings, my thoughts, my actions, my commitments. Present your body. That's your spiritual act of work. The rest of the passage is about how you care for his image, how you love people, even at the end, your enemies. Paul says, whatever you do, do it unto the Lord. You mow the lawn, pick up someone's washing, well, whatever you do, do it to God. So in other words, the scriptures really say worship is serving. It's service. Serving others. Serving God. Worship is service. And then we go, oh no, 6 o'clock, we're going to do a worship service. I think we've changed the meaning. If everything you do in this service now is your worship, we're in trouble. We're in serious trouble with God. Most of what we do in this formal part of this service is passive. You're thinking, you're reflecting, you're listening, you stand up a couple of times and sing. I don't know how many people you get to talk to tonight, but if this is your idea of a full-bodied picture of worship, see, we think it's okay to sing the songs, pray the prayers, come away and have a great night of church service experience, and then ignore people made in God's image, and that'll be all right. Even worse, we think you can slag off and dehumanise some people who mightn't have the same nationality, the same status of name, same sexual orientation. You cannot separate worship of God for how you care for his image. You know, we get so much media that you get to see world leaders all the time, right? And I'm not going to say bad stuff about any particular one. They'll do good and bad. I don't know enough about what they really do to say that, but I'm going to say something about what they've gone in print saying. Here's a guy on the world stage, and listen to how he speaks about people in God's image. In their country, he calls immigrants animals, people with bad genes who are poisoning the blood of our country. They eat pets, he dehumanises them, he calls them vermin. No matter how much a person may like that man's politics, you cannot connect that to worship of God by dehumanising God's image. So you see the disconnect? Are you with me on the disconnect? I get some sort of response, yeah, no. I think it's sort of with me. I think this is a big one. So what I want to talk about for 5 minutes is one of the reasons. It's only one. We'll hint of another, but there's just enough time for one. So in other words, think about the thermometer thing. There's physical conditions which will affect your physical health, and in the same way there's spiritual conditions that are going to affect your spiritual health. And this comes back from the 50s, right? 1950s, they created a thing called a TV. By the end of the 50s, most houses had a screen in them. And researchers at the end, they said there's a new social phenomenon, and they coined the term parasocial. You know what that means? They were describing the fact that people, while realising the TV personalities are playing fictitious characters, they're not real, they're acting, but they're good actors, but they had such deep emotional attachments to them, not just that they thought they knew them, they had feelings of love towards them that did not move them out of their armchair. They experienced and developed and were trained in pity. They were trained in actionless pity. They had the emotions of love without the actions of love. And 70 years down the track, we haven't just got a screen in every home, you've got a screen in every one of your pockets. And every single day it's training you in actionless pity. You look at stuff and you have emotions of love separate from the actions of love. That's training us. You know what pity is? When you have more empathy for someone in a hospital bed on a TV show than a hospital-bound member of our church that you haven't visited. You know what pity is? Pity is when I'm more emotionally invested in who's going to win the next Bachelor than my co-worker who's going from hookup to hookup in a tragic search for value. You know what pity is? At night when I just flick back and forth on pictures of bloodied images in Gaza, yawn and go to bed and think I've done something but haven't moved an inch. We have been trained every single day. You are right now in actionless pity, not compassion. You want to be trained in compassion, you're going to close the gap between you and someone and their suffering and start to carry the load. Another phenomenon that's why I think we've gone this direction and sort of detached from what Jesus is all about is a focus on spiritual narcissism. You know, the generation before me, I picked up the entail of this in the Christian world. It was all about go, go, go. My 20s were do as many things, as many programs, as many missions, as many musical events, as many visitations as I could for God. I did as much work on mission as I could, like a sort of a high output, low input sort of thing, all the while not attending to my inside world. I said things like, I'll never rust out. And people said, yeah. That was the last generation. But the pendulum for the millennium generation has swung exactly the other way of self-discovery, of high input, low output. We're all about spiritual wellness retreats, and let's go away and learn how to do Sabbath stuff and learn our Enneagram stuff. And we just focus more input, low output. This is one of the patterns we've seen. Listen to this right between the eyes quote from Martin Luther King Jr. The next quote there, Josh, if that's all right. Some have been tempted to reverse Jesus' command to go ye into all the world. Keep your blood pressure down, and lo, I'll make you a well-adjusted personality. That's pretty straight there, Martin. Okay. So there's some of the whys. The whys of Jesus measuring, or Jesus' thermometer, and maybe some of the reasons what we got there. I just want to give you 3 implications. The first one, this has to change the way we assess maturity and worship. When you ask yourself, how was worship today? The normal way we respond is by going, oh, it made me feel good. Music was cool. I liked it. The speaker was engaging. The song leader wasn't too chatty, but they kept me connected all the way through. I liked it. It felt good. It makes me more devoted to God. That's the wrong metric, guys. It needs to be, was I equipped to go and care for the poor and marginalised here? If I was, then that's worship. Because you cannot separate love of God for care of his image. That's the first one. The second one, I want you to get what Jesus is really pointing to. Because can we just acknowledge, when you heard the thing read by Rick, you probably thought, if I want to be one of the sheep on this side and not a goat, if I want to be a sheep, I just need to give to the poor, help the hungry, feed visit people who are sick and in prison. Does that sound like that to you? It pretty much said, look, if you did this, then you're a sheep. If you didn't do this, you're a goat. That's what it sounds like. Is that what Jesus is on about? See, in his very first Sermon on the Mount, Jesus first says his values run opposite to the world. The world's values are about success, reputation, comfort, control, power. Mine are about humility, love and service, that sort of stuff. My kingdom is different to this world. But then he makes, mostly through all his teaching, and especially this section, a very important distinction for us. It's the biggest issue for the early church. It was the issue we had with the Pharisees. If you want to understand Christianity, you've got to understand it is not religion. And Jesus is making that point every single week. I hope you've been hearing it. It is not the same as religion. And to make that point, in summary, at the end of the Sermon on the Mount, he gives these paired images. 2 paths, 2 trees, 2 homes. And he does that Because one of them is poison. One of those trees has got poison fruit. One of those paths will lead to devastation. One of those homes is built on rocky, like shaky ground. They look the same though. How do you tell? And he said, that's the problem. You've got to choose which path you're going to go. Okay. When Jesus says you've got to choose, most of you have instinctively thought, okay, what he's done in his teachings without reading it, he's given us a picture of obedience, a picture of disobedience. But here's the thing. In the Sermon on the Mount, he gave you not that. He gave you pictures of everyone obeying 10 Commandments, everyone praying, everyone giving to the poor. He didn't give you a picture of someone who prays and someone who doesn't. He didn't give you a picture of someone who gives to the poor and someone who doesn't. They all gave to the poor. In fact, if you go around the ethical systems, Buddhism, Confucianism, Islam, they all have very clear commands to go give alms to the poor. So how is Jesus any different? How is Christianity different from any of those ethical systems? Because we know it's different. How is it different? What I want to say first, he's not saying you need to go and do these things. God's going to give you a green light. That's not how it works. A guy called John Owen wrote a book about how you get rid of the bad and bring the good in your life. He said, you know what doesn't work? When you tell yourself, I need to give to the poor, I need to help those who are sick, I need to go do that because that's what a Christian does. I need to do better, I need to do that, I need to do what Craig and Red do or what James does or Martin does. I need to do those things because that's what people at our church do. John Owen goes, that doesn't work. That is a house of cards that will fall eventually. He said, primarily what you need to do is look specifically at what Jesus in particular has done for you in particular, and let that change everything. I want you to notice actually the focus of Jesus' measuring stick. It's not what you probably have thought so far. Verse 35, it's all about how you treat Jesus first. He says, for I was hungry and you gave me something to eat. Hear the emphasis? I was thirsty and you gave me something to drink. I was a stranger and you invited me in. I needed clothes and you clothed me. I was sick and you looked after me. I was in prison and you came to visit me. The first thing Jesus is getting at, the first thing that matters in terms of are you going to be among the sheep is how you treat Jesus. And that will be the thing that will define if you're going to care for God's image. It starts with how you respond to him. You know, if you go, look, I have this anger problem, I really hurt people a lot, I'm very vindictive, you know, I just like invictive, I just hurt people all the time. So I need to stop. I need to not do that. I need to make sure I don't do that. I need to not be vindictive. But John Owen said, that doesn't work. Jesus says, that doesn't work. What you need to do is ask a question like this. When God came, if he had been vindictive, where would I be now? And since when Jesus came, he wasn't vindictive and used his anger to destroy what was destroying me, that opens the door to everything. If you look at these images, I was hungry, I was thirsty, I was sick, I was estranged, I was in prison. That's Jesus' biography. That's his life when he came. Just think about it. If Jesus is God in the flesh, the only one worthy of your worship and honour, and he was willing for you to come and be dishonoured, to get hungry and thirsty and naked, imprisoned and in a grave, that changes everything. That changes everything. That happened to free you for the sake of others, to free you to help others who are in need. And the last thing I want to say, what are we going to do? Can I be very simple? You start where you are and you start today. You start where you are and you start today. You know, researchers of Holocaust rescuers in the war So these are non-Jewish Europeans who rescued Jewish people at massive risk for their own life in the Nazi occupation. They researched this couple over 700 people. And they said, what was the common denominator? They were trying to find what actually led them to have that capacity. They said the common denominator was the type of love they practiced in their closest relationships. So maybe here's a takeaway for you. The people who are most likely to love in sacrificial big ways when the pressure's on are those who practice sacrificial love in small ways when the pressure's off. Those who are most likely to give sacrificial love in big ways when the pressure's on are the ones who practice sacrificial love in small ways when the pressure is off. Now I know in the room tonight, look, there's a bunch of us here who are you get over 80 people in the room, you're a little bit nervy already, okay? I know you're introverted, it's like a bit tricky. I respect that. But here's the thing. There's no guns pointed at us at all. In fact, even if you have your own personal challenges, this is actually a safe place. So what I want to encourage you to do, worship doesn't finish when we finish the last song and prayer. It's sort of, according to this passage, begins. And those who are more likely to practice sacrificial love in big ways when the pressure is on are ones who practice sacrificial love in small ways when the pressure's off. And tonight's one of those ways. I want to encourage you to take the opportunity to maybe go and speak to someone you've been meaning to speak to for a few weeks or maybe months and actually catch up with them tonight. Maybe actually look around the room and ask yourself, who isn't here who's always here or normally here? And decide to go and contact them before tomorrow night. That's practicing sacrificial love in small ways when the pressure's off. Before they need you to help you, they need help with their rent or they're in hospital or something. You start where you are, we start now. It's pretty exciting because we can never disconnect worship of God with how we care for his image. I'm going to pray. I hope you've been challenged. Father God, thank you for the way you speak so directly through the Bible and for actually the hope you give us, that this is not about us getting it right, but how you got it right on our behalf so we can actually change. Please help us in the ways that are real for each of us to start where we are and start today. Amen.